It is 5 o'clock on the West Coast, so why don't we kick this meetup off for today? So welcome everyone to the what are we? Is this December? Oh good Lord, it's December.
It's
It's the last
December.
meetup of the
Yep.
year. Holy cow! Um, so welcome everyone to the show here. I'm going to share my screen. I'm coming to you live from a hotel lobby right now, so this is a little bit different for me. I'm going to lose context to everything that I'm used to seeing here. So let me just minimize that. There we go. And I'll just minimize this on the top because I don't know if people can see that or not. So here we go. Welcome everyone to the show for today. So today we're going to be talking about successful charting with VBA, presented by my good friend Jon Peltier. But before we do, of course, we're going to go through and do our normal of thanking the sponsors that make this possible. Skillwave Training being the training company that I run with my partner, Matt Allington, where we teach you to be better at Excel and Power BI, and the awesome technologies can really make your data sing. Excel Guru is the parent company of Skillwave and also the distributor of Monkey Tools, which is my add-in to help you build better data models faster. Works with Power Query, Power Pivot, and storing different formulas and lambdas and queries to inject for later. New in Monkey Tools, the last sort of public release that really has some cool stuff to celebrate in here beyond bug fixes was back in October 10th. We have added the ability for a new DAX indenter, better license management, bug fixes, and you can now indent your DAX measures right inside the Video Monkey by pressing Control I. Built in the last version as well, I've added that as well to the DAX sleuth as well. So if you're writing your own measure there, you can Control I to indent there as well. We do have a free using Monkey Tools course. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you do. It'll show you how all the free features work, all the page features work, and you'll see that there is actually a ton of functionality in Monkey Tools that is available for free. You just install it, it just works out the gate. Don't have to pay anything for it to get the usage. Things like naming tables when you create them, injecting new formulas and stuff like that, which are pretty awesome. All outlined at the course at this particular URL here. You can go check it out and see how Monkey Tools can benefit you. The last kickoff for 2024 is coming up for my Excel Fundamentals Academy. This is a fantastic program for people who are trying to round out knowledge gaps in Excel. We start by reviewing some, key formulas and structures and how they work, and dive into pivot tables and Power Query and data visualization. If you're interested in, as I say, rounding out those knowledge gaps from a self-taught learning journey, this is a fantastic program. Or if you happen to already be pretty comfortable with your pivot table ballgame, you can move up to our self-service BI Academy as well. This is our last kickoff for the year, is coming December 11th. This is a huge program with over 50 hours of training and coaching here. Like the Fundamentals Academy, it gives you access to my live Ask Ken Anything sessions where you can actually meet up with me twice a month. We go through and we answer people's questions. In this particular program, you also get access to Monkey Tools. You get access to my book, my recipe cards, pretty much everything I have to offer is available in the SSBI Academy. You can check out the URL here to get into that particular program. This meetup, along with all meetups, is recorded and will be posted and hosted on the Skillwave YouTube channel. It is going to take me about a week to get this one all produced because I am traveling at the moment and I don't have access to the machine that I use to do this. But mid next week, I will post on Meetup that the recording is available. So if you want to review it after the fact, you can absolutely do so. Last thing I want to sort of say here before we turn it over to Jon is that if you would like to come and speak to our user group, we are always looking for speakers who want to share the cool things that they do in Excel, Power BI, or any part of the Microsoft Power Platform. Just get in contact with us at the URL that you see here, and we'll get in touch with you and get you on our stage. And now, let's welcome my good friend Jon Peltier to come and talk to us about successful charting with VBA. So, Jon, I'm going to let you take over the screen sharing and let's see what you got for us today.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ken. Let me share my screen here. Going to be this screen. And okay, there's my Excel workbook. Ken was going to post a link to it in the chat, so I don't see the chat here, but
I'll actually post it later, Jon. I don't have it all prepped and stored and whatever else, but we'll post a link to the work. Did you want it posted now? Because I can certainly share
well,
it
you
to
know
you.
what? I can I have it on my website too. So let me just put it in here. It's
Okay, cool.
peltiertech.com/chartvba.zip. And when you download the zip, you have to unblock it then when you open it, you'll be able to use the macros that are inside it. It's just one file, and so anyway, let me give a 60-second introduction. My name's Jon Peltier. I've probably presented in front of a lot of the audience at one time or another. But just in case you don't know me, I'm Jon Peltier. This picture of me was at a conference a couple of years ago. I think I'm directing a plane landing at the runway there. I don't know. But anyway, my background's in engineering, not finance like Ken and so many other Excel experts. And I've used Excel extensively for over 30 years. My areas of expertise within Excel are data visualization, a fancy word for charting, as well as data processing with formulas, pivot tables, and other techniques, and VBA programming. I've been a Microsoft Excel MVP since 2001, and I started my own company, Peltier Technical Services, in 2004. More about that in a moment. Here's how you can contact me. You can visit the website at peltiertech.com. My LinkedIn handle is my name, Jon Peltier, no spaces or dashes or whatever. And you can email me at john@peltiertech.com. If you have a question about this presentation or really any Excel topic, shoot me a message. Say, hey, I attended your Vancouver User Group talk about charting with VBA, and I was wondering, and ask your question. I get probably a couple dozen emails a week from people with questions about my website or about other stuff, and I answer as many of them as I can, sometimes just with a link to an answer, or sometimes I'll write out an answer. And sometimes if I write out an answer, that turns into a blog post, so we all win. Let me just say a couple of words about Peltier Tech. As I mentioned, it's Peltier Technical Services. It's been around for over 20 years, which is kind of mind-boggling. It's my second career, and it's already longer than my first. And the Peltier Tech website is even older. It started as a Yahoo GeoCities site back in 2001. Anybody remember GeoCities? Since then, it's accumulated hundreds of tutorials on many Excel topics, specializing, of course, in charting and VBA. Peltier Tech works on custom Excel projects for clients based on my expertise in data management, charting, and VBA. Peltier Tech also builds, maintains, and markets charting add-ins for Excel. And Peltier Tech provides training in beginning and advanced Excel topics. For details, visit the Peltier Tech website. So, Ken says, hey, John, you want to come talk to the Vancouver group? And I thought, sure, I'll always talk to people. But every time I give a presentation, I want to do it on something different because I don't want people to, think, oh, I only have one story. And so I got to thinking, well, what am I good at in Excel? Well, I'm pretty good at charts and I'm pretty good at VBA. So why don't I combine them into one topic? And that topic is charting success with VBA. And I assume everybody's at least dabbled a little bit with VBA and dabbled a little bit with charts. And here I'm just going to, combine the dabbles into something larger. We're going to start recording a macro, and that'll just, let me show you a little bit about the VB programming environment. We'll write, well, we won't be writing the macros. I have them already written, but I'll be showing them to you and describing what went into them to insert a chart, to insert multiple charts. Inserting one chart is okay, but when you can insert multiple charts, you're saving a bunch of time. So that's where you really get your benefits. How to format a chart, how to format multiple charts, how to resize and align charts, and how to modify chart data. And of course, that's really about 1% of what you can do with VBA and charts, but it's a good 1% to start on. So what we're going to do is record a macro. And it's going to be a simple macro. All I'm going to do is insert a chart using a shortcut, and we're going to see what the recorded macro looks like. And then I'll describe it a little bit. And then we'll, based on that, we'll start building our own procedures that enhance what the recorded macro does. So let's go and insert a chart, the shortcut is Alt and the F1 function key. And what that does is it inserts a chart of the default chart type, which if you've never changed your default chart type, is clustered column. I change it all the time back and forth, mostly to show people how to do it. And you notice when I started, I only selected one cell in the worksheet. But when you select one cell, Excel figures out what the block of what the block of data is that includes that one cell. And that's what it uses to make the chart. You see, that's the block that's highlighted here. And so now let's go to the Visual Basic Editor and see what we got. Alt F11 is the shortcut to open the VB Editor. And it took a second, but it's open on my other monitor. So let me drag it over here. And I'll show you some things about it before we even get to what I recorded. So over here is what's called the VBA project pane, and that lists all the workbooks and add-ins that are running in Excel right now. So there's a Lambda Explorer. That's an add-in by Charles Williams that helps you figure out what you did wrong when you were writing a Lambda formula. Ad hoc tools, that's just some small little helpful routines that I use for myself. The name manager is Jan Carl Peters's outstanding tool to manage the names in your workbook. Peltier charts for Excel, that's my commercial software. Solver, used to do solve problems. And finally, VBA project. This is the workbook that I'm using to demonstrate this. And you see that there is a sheet, there is an Excel object in here for every sheet in the workbook, as well as an object for the workbook itself. And there's a bunch of code modules because I've written most of the code we're going to use already. The recorded one is in module 1. And you know what I forgot to do? I turned on the recorder. I forgot to turn it off. So actually, it must have turned itself off at some point. But you see there's a whole bunch of stuff here that we don't need now. Let me get rid of the stuff that it recorded after I meant to stop recording. I do this all the time, and sometimes I'll have like reams of recorded code. So you see what I did is I selected a cell first. I inserted a chart, and that's what these two lines are. First, it inserts a chart with this line, and the line is ActiveSheet.Shapes. It inserts a shape in the active chart, and the type of shape it inserts is a chart, and it uses something called Add Chart 2. The old way was Add Chart 1, but that was based on Excel 2007 charts, which are ugly and they have a lot of dark lines everywhere. And Add Chart 2 came out in Excel 2013, and it's a little nicer looking. And so that's the command. And then inside the parentheses are a couple of arguments. Clustered column is the chart type it inserted, and 201 is the default chart style for the clustered column chart. If you leave that out, it'll use just what the default is, but it put it in even though it was the default. And then what it does is it selects the chart that is inserted, and then with the active chart now, which is the selected chart, it sets the source data to this hard-coded range, which is the whole range that includes the cell that I selected at the beginning. So that's the recorded code. And you see, this is the recorded code. You see, when I recorded this macro that I pasted into the workbook, my default chart type at the time was XL line markers, and the default style was 332. I usually don't specify a style. I just leave it blank, and it gives me the default style, which is the cleanest style there is. The styles are the ones you can see up here in the chart styles gallery, and you see one of them is clear, and the rest of them are filled with all kinds of bad visual effects, and you're better off just staying away from them. And so that's fine. Now let me just go back to the macro I have here. It should say option explicit at the top. If it doesn't, it means that there's a setting here, and I'm not going to explain what it's all about, but in the options, there's a setting here called require variable declaration. That's what option explicit does, and it means before you use the variable, you have to declare it. What this does is it prevents you from accidentally typing the name of a variable wrong. If you're not requiring declaration, any new thing that you type, Excel will just say, oh, that's another variable, and it'll just give it a value of nothing or blank or zero or whatever is relevant for that variable type. And it'll be just wrong because it's not the one that you thought you were changing, but now you spelled it wrong. And then also this auto syntax check, uncheck it, because if it's checked, you're going to get a lot of annoying messages in the middle of your work. So here's the Project Explorer. There's a properties window down here, which matters a lot more if you're building user forms, but we're not doing that in this situation. It's really not a class here about programming VBA, so I don't think I'll explain much more about Visual Basic. I'll just move that out of my way. And what I'm going to do now is write a variation of this, and it's called Insert Chart 1. Like the recorded code, I'm using a hard-coded data range. I'm going to introduce an object variable. So I'm going to declare my chart as chart, and then I'm going to use, instead of just saying active sheet shapes add chart, I'm going to set my chart to that add chart, and then at the end I go dot chart. So dot chart means the chart that's embedded in that shape. And then that way, when I set my source data, I can do my chart dot set source data. So it means for that chart, set the source data. And then of course, active sheet range dot this, that's hard coded. It's not ideal yet, but it's a step better than the other one. Let me just run the code. It's this code that's already in my workbook, and I'll go click, and here's the code. And you see it used that. I didn't have to select any data. It just made the chart based on the hard-coded range, and you see it's the default chart position. It's centered vertically and horizontally within the visible Excel window here. So there's many rows above and below and so forth. Also, you either get no legend or you get the default legend position, depending on what's selected. Now, I was selecting a blank cell over here, so when it inserted the chart in this line, it inserted a blank chart. There was no data in it, so there wasn't going to be any legend. And then when it applied the data, there's still no legend. If I do the same thing, let me move this one off to the side. If I now select a cell in that range and I run the code, when it inserts the chart, it inserts the chart with this data. This set source data is almost redundant if you're in a data range. If I do this, now my legend will be in the default position, which is below the chart. So you see the difference between the two charts is that one of them I had selected data first and one of them I hadn't. And so that's something we're going to have to clean up in a few iterations. So the first thing I want to do is I want to use a different way to select the data. So I don't want to hard code it. I want the user to be able to select data. So what I'm going to do, first of all, let me move over a little bit. Here's the code. I'm going to first check to see if the user has selected a range. And if the user has not selected a range, maybe the chart that they just made a minute ago is still selected, so there's no range selected. Well, what I'm going to do is give the user a message, say, hey, select the range and try again. And then we're going to go to exit sub. Exit sub is just a label at the end of the procedure, and it'll go right down to here and then run any commands after that. So if I need to change anything, I'll do it there. Like sometimes what you do is you turn off screen updating so your code runs faster. Well, right there after the exit sub label is where you're going to turn screen updating back on, and so forth. So now what I'm going to do, if my selection is a range, I come down here. So I'm going to declare a variable chart data as a range, and chart data is going to be a selection. And if that selection has only one cell, that means I've selected one cell. It says, okay, change that to chart data dot the current region. The current region is what you get is if you do control asterisk, and Excel finds this whole block of data that includes that cell. Now, if I had selected this cell over here, that is still a range. So I won't bail out at the beginning, but when I go to do current region or control asterisk, it's still only one cell. So it's still only one cell. I ask the user to select an appropriate data range and try again and go to exit sub. If we get through that and now we have a reasonable data range, then I'm going to make my chart. And now this should look pretty much like what the recorded macro was, or actually what my first iteration on the recorded macro. Active sheets, shapes, add chart to, line markers, and then set source data. And I'm going to use chart data, and I'm going to add something. I'm going to add plot by and plot by columns. Sometimes Excel will want to plot by row, and I almost always want it by column, so I put that in routinely. So I'll select the cell, and we'll go insert that chart, and here's my chart. And you can see that it uses that whole range, even though I'd only selected one cell. I still have my default legend position. The chart is still in the default centered position. Let me show you what happens if I pick a range that's more than just one cell. So let's say I select, the first 3 months and the first 2 series of data. I'll insert that chart. Because it's already more than one cell, it's not going to do the current region thing. So it's just going to use the data range that I told it to use. And that's fine. So that's pretty good. But there's always room for improvement. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to define the chart position. And if this is my chart data, what I want to do is have a chart position which is over here. It's let me go to the code here, and we'll see what it's doing. First, if the selection is not arranged, then bail out. If the selection is arranged, that's good. If it's only one cell, use the current region or bail out. But now I'm going to define another variable, chart cover, as another range. And that is the chart data, which, assuming this is my chart data, my chart cover is going to be offset that many columns plus 1 to the right, so if I offset 4 columns plus 1, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 1. Here's where the top left cell is. And then I want to resize it so it's 10 rows high and 5 columns wide. So that's this gray rectangle. And then when that all gets done, I do my active sheet shapes, add chart, and Excel line markers. But you can add some other parameters there. And those other parameters are the left, top, width, and height of the range of the chart. So I've defined that range, so it's going to be the left of that range is going to be the left of my chart. The top of the range is the top of my chart, and so forth. And then I'm going to set my source data, plot by columns, which I showed a minute ago. And then what I'm going to do is make sure I have the legend in the position that I want. So I want the legend to the right of the chart. And of course, if for some reason the chart doesn't have a legend at that point and I try to set the legend position, I'll get an error. So I first have to say has legend equals true. That adds a legend to the chart. And the next one puts the legend where I want it to go. And so let's see how that works. Insert chart, it works. Oh, And now I wasn't in an appropriate, well, actually, no, I should have, I don't know, something funny happened. I expected to get a message box, but I didn't. So you see, here's my chart. It's covering exactly the area that I had the rectangle on. Here's my legend off to the right. The data range is that data range based on the one cell that I selected. Everything's cool. Well, how else can I enhance this whole technique? I can actually, instead of guessing based on what the active cell is when the program runs, I can ask the user to select the range they want to do using the input box. And I'll show you that. And I can ask the user, where do you want the chart to go, using the input box again. I'm going to start out with some defaults here. So I'm going to declare a data range and as a range, and data address as a string, which is the address of the data range. So what I'm going to do first is I'm not going to say if type of selection equals range, because, well, I'm just not going to bother with that, because I'm going to use whatever the selection is. But if the selection is not a range, set data range equals selection is going to give me an error. So I'm going to say on error, resume next. And that means, okay, you get an error, don't show the user the error, just go and do the next statement after the error and then continue from there. So the next statement after the error is on error, go to 0. That means stop any error handling and then just proceed. So I go here, set data range equals selection. If not data range is nothing, that's how in VBA you say if data range is something. So if the data range is something, if it's one cell, then do the current region thing. And if it's still, and after doing that, if it's more than one cell, then my data address is going to be the address of my data range. Otherwise, if a range isn't selected, my data address is just going to be nothing. It's going to be an empty string. If my data range has only one cell, that means it's down here somewhere. My data range address, there's none. So, well, I'm not setting it, putting it in the variable. So data address is going to be a blank. And so we see where that comes up now. Now I'm declaring my chart data. Again, on error, resume next, on error, go to 0 in case what it returns isn't a range. And I'm going to say set chart data equals application.input box. Here's where I get to ask the user what they want. And so the first thing in there is a prompt. Select the data to be plotted in your chart. And then the title of the input box dialog, which is going to be select chart data. And then the default value is the data address. So if there's a valid range selected already, that range will be highlighted in the input box. If the user cancels, if the user says okay, then the address that they get out of that, actually what they do get is a range. See this 8 at the end, that means the data type that input box will return to the procedure is a range. If you cancel, you'll get an error here because it won't be a range, and then trying to set chart data to a non-range is an error, but I'm using on error, resume next to bypass the error. And then if chart data is nothing, that means you canceled it, it wasn't a range, blah, blah, blah. Then you go to exit sub. Some amateur programmers might put a line in here that says message box, user canceled, or procedure canceled by user. And to me, that's annoying because the user canceled it, and then something pops up saying, hey, you just canceled this. It's like, I know because I clicked the cancel button. And now they have to cancel the cancellation. It's kind of a waste of time. Now I'm adding something else here. If the user only selected one cell over here, it's going to go here and use the current region, assuming they wanted to expand it to the larger region. I probably should put something else in here that if the current region is only one cell, bail out, but I didn't do that. In my version 2.0 of this software, I might put that in. Okay, so that's my the data that I'm going to chart, this takes a lot longer to explain than it did to write and it does to run. Now I have another data range. I'm using the same variable that I used before. And it is chart data, offset the number of columns +1, and resize by 10 rows and 5 columns. So assuming that this is my range, this dotted rectangle is that, and that's going to be the default range that we're going to use to draw the chart. That's what it's going to cover. And so I get through all of this. And again, if the user cancels, means they change their mind, we just go to exit sub. Don't bother them with any more messages. And then all this stuff here is pretty much what we've had all along. So now let's see how this works. And this with the input boxes, I think is a very nice. It's quick if the user wants to use the defaults. Just a couple of clicks, but if they want to adjust it, it's very easy to do. So let's see how that works. Insert chart 4. I get an input box and it says, select the data to be plotted in your chart. And you see that it gives me what it thinks I might want to use based on where the active cell is. And I say, okay, that looks good. And I'll say, okay, where do you want the range? Where do you want the chart to cover? And it highlights that other range, and I can say, okay, that looks good, and I'll click it, and there it is. But now if I want to do something different, let's say I select this and I run the code, it doesn't have a default range because I selected a blank cell. So I can come up here and select whatever range I want, or I can even just select one cell in that range, and I'll say okay. And then it says, select the range to be covered by your chart. And now I'll make it a bigger chart, and I'll say, okay. And here's my new chart using my new settings. And I don't know, that works out quite nicely. Okay, so that's fine, inserting one chart. But there's something that's really tedious to do. And sometimes, you might not want to plot all these 4 columns in one chart. You might want to chart one column each in 4 separate charts. And so let's see what that code looks like. First of all, what I did previously, whenever I was working with my my chart cover range, where are we here? Oh, no, it wasn't here. It was in previous ones. I just had hard-coded 10 rows and 5 columns, and that's kind of bad practice because eventually you'll get to a state where you're using 10,5 in several different places, and then you decide, no, for this report, I want it to be 8,4, and you'll change it everywhere, except I guarantee you're going to miss one of the places. And so the right way to do that is to set up rows high and columns wide one place, and then refer back to those constants later. But so what I want to do here is build 4 charts up here. And so the way I'll do that is we'll start out, and if a range isn't selected, ask them to select the range. If a range is selected, use the current region and make sure it's still more than one cell. And then now we come down here and we declare a long, which is data calls. That's how many columns there are in the data. And the way that is the first column is going to be the X values, and everything else are going to be the Y values in the individual charts. I'm going to set a chart anchor as a range. And what that is the top left cell of the first chart. And then the first chart is going to be 5 columns wide and 10 columns high, like that. And then each other chart is going to be the same size, but the second one is going to be over here, and the third one is going to be down here, and the fourth one, and so on. And so anyway, that's the number of columns. There's my chart anchor. Chart labels. My labels are my X-axis labels. Those are in the first column of my all data range. And then what I'm going to do is I have another variable data call, and that is the column number that this particular chart is plotting. I've already used 1 for my X values, and now I'm going to start with 2 and go to up to data calls, and those will be the Y values in each successive chart. And so I'm doing this in a for loop, so I'm stepping through it bit by bit. Now I declare a chart cover as before, and this chart anchor resize by the rows and columns. And then based on which number of the chart it is, this combination of int here and mod here tells me where in that grid of charts this particular chart is going to go. I'm not going to explain the logic of that. It's something that easy enough to work out. And then I come back down here again and set my chart equals shapes.add chart, and it's covering the chart cover range, setting my source data. And what I'm using here is the union of chart labels, which is column 1, and chart values, which is column data call. So it's column 1 and column 2, and then it's column 1 and column 3, and so forth. Since there's only one series in the chart, I'm going to say has legend equals false, and I'm going to say has title equals true. And by default, in a chart with only one series, the chart title is the name of that series. So if I look back over here, the chart title is going to be 1 because that series is 1, and it's going to be 2 because the series is named 2. So let's go and run this code. It's going to run in 1 second. It took me 5 minutes to describe the code. Oh, I didn't select an appropriate range. So, and then we'll go bing, and here are my charts. And here's chart 1, and you see it's using the first column as the X values, the months, and the second column as the series name and the series values. And then chart 2, I'm moving over a column, and chart 3, I'm moving over again, and chart 4. This is actually a common problem asked in online forums. Usually it's somebody has a whole bunch of data and they want each pie chart to plot one row of the data. So it's basically the same problem. But it's a lot easier, especially if you're writing the code just to do it once, it's not easier to write the code. But if you have to do this more than about 3 times, write the code and do it that way. This example is a little different than the last one. What I want to do is I have 4 different ranges here, and I want to make a chart of each range. I want each chart to be offset from the range, next to the range, and I want it to be a certain size. And see over here, I have chart rows high and columns wide. And each chart is going to look the same. And I'm going to use the cell in the top left corner of the data range as the title of the chart. They're all showing sales by month, but each chart is going to have a different title based on that. So let's go over to my code here and walk through it. I've specified the dimensions of my chart. If the chart is if the selection is not arranged, well, notify the user and bail out. And now the way this is going to work is you have to select one cell in each range, and I'm going to do that and use current region. The other approach is to select each range individually like this, the whole range, but that's kind of tedious to select all these ranges, and it's easy to select too much and so forth. So I find it, and I make all these improvements as I use code and saying, geez, it'd be nice if all I had to do was select one cell in each range, and then I incorporate it. So that's what we're going to do. So now we come over here. If the selection is arranged, then we're going to just proceed. And now we're going to define another range variable, R area. So for each R area in those areas. So when you have a multi-area selection, each area, it's its own separate thing. So I want to look at each of those in turn. And so my chart data is going to be that area, but the current region of that area. So I don't need to select the whole current region. It just automatically does that down here in the code. And then my chart cover is going to be that range offset to here. And it's so many rows high, so many columns wide. And now my title is going to be, it's a range, and it's the top left cell of the whole data range. So I'll come down over here, my chart, and I'm adding chart, line markers, left top width height. That's all cool. Set source data. And I'm using with my chart and with, and everything in there has a dot. Source is chart data, which is each of the blocks of data, plotting by columns. Has legend, false, because there's only one series in the chart. I don't need a legend. Has title equals true, and the chart title dot text equals title value, the value of that cell. And so this should work pretty nicely. So let me select one cell from each of those ranges, insert charts from ranges. Boom, and there it is. Faster than I can even say click the button. And of course, if I had not selected a cell from each of those ranges, if I left one out, I'd have missed that one. But I can go back and catch up with it, because it doesn't matter if there's only one area in the selection. And the one thing that might be problematic is if, let me get rid of West. Let's say I have, here's my two ranges. I'll click that, and it looks okay. But really, because I have two separate cells selected within that range, it made duplicate charts. So these are just funny things that happen. You can do all kinds of error checking in the code, and if two of your areas result in the same chart data range, you can skip one of them and so forth. Well, those are embellishments. Let's see. How about formatting a chart? So I'm going to describe a couple of features of a shape. A shape has two properties that indicate where it's located in the worksheet. It has a top left cell, that cell there behind the top left corner of the chart, and a bottom right cell. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the top left cell to position the chart, just to make sure it's lined up with the grid. And we're going to make it 10 rows high and 5 columns wide. That's not a bad size for a chart. We're going to assign a chart type. This is a column chart, but I want it to be a line chart with markers. And I'm going to reset the legend. I don't want it below the chart. I want it to the right of the chart. And so let's go over and look at the code. Here's my chart dimensions. If there's no active chart, you have to select a chart so the code knows which chart to format. If you haven't selected one, it tells you select a chart and try again. Now that we have an active chart, we're going to declare a range called chart cover. And there's an error here, and I'll show you what happens when you get an error. When I set the chart cover to the parent.top left cell, parent.top left cell is fine. But if I try to resize that, even if it's in a different, it's like somehow Excel gets confused, saying you can't resize the top left cell because it's one cell. That's irrelevant. Chart cover should just be, based on the top left cell, it's this many rows high and that many wide. And then we go and change the left top width and height of the parent of the active chart, which is the shape that it sits in. And then we come over here, line markers, and legend position right. So what happens if we run that code? I said we're going to get an error, and this is what the error dialog is going to look like. But that's fine. Let me select the chart. And actually, if I didn't select the chart, I get this little message, select the chart first. and we'll try formatting the chart, and I'll go click, and we get an error. And here's my error. It showed up on my other screen in front of my Visual Basic window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit debug, and let me drag Visual Basic over here, and we see that the error is in this line here: set chart cover equals parent.top-left-cell.resize. And I know it's in the .resize because I did a bunch of other testing and I submitted it to Microsoft as a bug, and it's been this way since forever, as far as I can tell. So I'm not holding my breath that they'll fix it, but I fixed it because I'm kind of the king of workarounds here. So let me show you how I fixed it. This is the cell that had the error. So that's the error. And so what I'm going to do is unhide a couple of rows in here. And like I said, I'm the king of workarounds. And so what I did is I took the parent.top-left-cell address. I took the address of that cell and turned it into a range by saying range of that address. And then I was able to resize it and so forth without an error. And then do all this parent resizing and repositioning and the chart type and everything else. And so so I'm here in Visual Basic. Let's see, I wonder if I can do this with two different screens. Come on. Pardon me while I try to work in Windows here. So so that is still my active chart. And what I'm going to do when weird stuff like this happens, you can step through the code. You don't have to run through it full speed. Well, first of all, I'm going to comment out that line with a single quote. And now I'm going to use my edited line here, and I'll hit my F8 key. The F8 key steps you one line at a time through the code. So you see, okay, that didn't give me any error. So that worked. That workaround works. And now my left, you see the chart moved to the left, and my top, my chart moved up, and my width, the chart becomes a little bit narrower, and my height, and the chart becomes a little bit shorter. And now my chart type, here's lines with markers, and now my legend position. And there's the code. It worked just fine. And now I've commented out the offending line so I won't get that error again. Speaking of errors in charts, I'm going to take a little aside because I think I'm talking faster than when I practiced earlier. I showed before when I recorded a macro, I did Alt F1, which inserts a chart in the active sheet. But there's another shortcut, which is just F11. And what that does is it inserts a chart sheet. So I'm going to record a macro again, and I'll insert a chart sheet. And so I'm not going to bother giving it a nickname or whatever. And I'll say F11. And here's my chart sheet. It's separate. It's not in a workbook. I don't think people use chart sheets that much, but I have a client that does, and he sent me an email the other day, and he says, well, there's a problem with this code. And so let me pop up what the code is that inserts a chart sheet. Let me bring VBA back over here. And the same way as we had shapes.addChart2 adds a chart, it adds a chart to the worksheet. Here, you just say charts.add2. And what that does is it adds a standalone chart sheet to the workbook. And then it sets the source data and so forth. And so that's fine. That's a great little thing. But anyway, I said it's a bug, so there must be something wrong with it. So what I'm going to do is I have my data range here. I'm going to run the code. So developer tab, macros will bring up a list of all the macros that you could possibly want to run. These are all the macros in the active workbook. Or Alt F8 pops up that same dialog. And it's macro 2 because it's the second one oh, and you know what I forgot to do? I did this before and I did it again. I forgot to stop recording. So now I stopped recording. And so let's come back over here, Alt F8, Alt F8. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Macro name is macro 2. And I'll say run. And I get an error. And here's the error I got. Method add to failed. Okay, debug. And what failed? I'll drag this over, and it's this charts.add2. And so my client was rather concerned about this because he uses charts.add2 a lot of times. He writes his own commercial statistics graphics software, and he uses a lot of these charts, chart sheets. And he wrote me in a panic. He said, this was working last month. What happened? And, I tried it and it failed right away. And, I was talking with Ken before we got started, and it's like, well, Microsoft is a lot different now than it was 15 years ago. You report a bug now and they hop right on it. And, the way you report a bug is you come over to, let's see, on help and not contact support, on feedback. And there's a little thing here. I want to report a problem. Hello. Oh, I have to be patient here. Sometimes these things take longer when you're running in video and you report a problem. You describe the problem, you include a screenshot, you upload files if it's relevant. And I always tell them they can contact me. And of course, I'm in the secret MVP society here, so I just write my name and say Excel MVP. And when this goes over there, they see, oh, it's that guy John with another bug. And but anyway, Monday I told them about the bug, and this morning I heard back from Microsoft, and they said, well, they have a fix, and they're in the process of rolling it out through all the updates. So I feel like, well, I've really done my duty this week by reporting this bug. So another related funny story. One time I was out in Microsoft. The MVPs go to Microsoft every year, and I was talking to one of the PMs, and he introduced me to a couple of engineers. And one of the guys says, "Oh, you're the guy that sends us all the bugs." It's like, yeah, that's me. So, all right. So anyway, that aside, let's say I have a bunch of charts. Remember what my formatting was here was picking a chart size, assigning a chart type, line and markers, and putting the legend in the right place. And now in this case, it's like the other example where each chart uses a different data range here. So what I want to do is select multiple charts so I can run the code and do all of them at once instead of having to repetitively do that. And so I have 4 charts, and I have a decoy here, which you can tell by the different UI elements that it's a shape, which is really it's a picture of a donut chart. And so what I want to do is change the chart type of any charts. If it's not a chart, I just want to leave it alone, because if you start, if I want to resize this, you start getting, oh, that didn't do what I expected, Control Z. If I make it wider, well, now I'm going to get a distorted chart, and nobody likes that. So anyway, and so what I'm going to do, if it's a chart, I'm going to format it. If it's not a chart, I'll leave it alone. Formatting it means line with markers, not just line like this one, not column, not bar, definitely not pie chart. And we're going to get rid of the legend because there's only one series in each chart. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do it with 2 procedures. One procedure is going to format the chart. So it's called format this chart, and I'm going to pass into this procedure a variable which is the chart that I want it to work on. I tell it how tall and how wide I want the chart to be. I'm going to define the chart cover, and again, it's going to be based on where the chart is. It's going to find the top left cell and do it on that basis. So for that chart, it's going to be that cell, and it's going to make it 7 rows high, 5 columns wide. It's going to change it to line markers and has legend equals false. So let's see how that works. Let me just select all of my different things, and if I'm not paying attention, I select my non-chart, and I come over here and format charts and click, and now look, they're all the right chart type. Look, it didn't do anything to the non-chart, to that picture of a donut chart, but all the other ones got rid of the legend. It made them all line and markers, and they're all the same size. So now I have to do is line them up a little more carefully. So now, of course, my next example will take a bunch of charts. They're already the right chart type, but it will just line them up for me. And so let me go through that code here. Oh, you know what? I actually talked about the format chart. Let me just go back and specify how it selected what charts to work on. That's this routine, which is kind of and the reason I need to use a separate procedure is because I have to call it at different points within the main procedure. So first of all, it looks at the selection. It says, if not active chart is nothing, which again is Excel's funny way of saying if active chart is something. That means if you have an active chart, we'll do format this chart, active chart. And active chart is the chart that I'm passing into the procedure. If I've selected multiple charts, the name of the selection is called drawing objects. So if I've selected drawing objects, that means I have 2 or more shapes that have been selected. So I declare a temporary variable of shape, and for each shape that is in the shape range that is my drawing objects, if that shape has a chart, that means it's a chart, then format that chart. If it doesn't have a chart, so if it's this picture, or if it's this button, for example, or if it's anything else, don't do anything. But if it has a chart, format this chart. So that's what goes on there. What if I want to just resize and realign all these charts? So the way this routine is going to work is I have a bunch of different charts, and I'm going to select them in order. And what it will do is it uses the first chart that I selected as a template for the size and position of all the other charts. And then it loops through the rest of the charts, makes them all that size, and then lines them up. And so let's go through the code and see how that works. This is only one procedure, not a bunch of them, not 2 procedures like the previous example. So I won't forget to describe half of it before I run it. So if I've selected drawing object, if I haven't selected drawing objects, if I've only selected one chart, well, that's the first chart. That's the one I'm using the template, so it doesn't get changed. But if I have multiple charts, if I have drawing objects, then that's cool. So I just use this new variable SEL selection. That's just a holding variable for what I've selected. And then I declare chart 1 again as a shape. That's the first one in the ones that I've selected. So that's the one I'm going to use as a template. And then I have some other variables, iCell and nCell. nCell is a number of selected shapes. iCell is just a temporary thing. I'm figuring out what's a good number to use for the number of, I'm going to align these in the grid, and I might want 2 charts in a row, or I might want 3 charts in a row. And what this is a good preliminary value for that, because I'm going to pop up an input box. I use input box a lot, and it's going to say how many charts in a row, and it'll pop up this default calculated number, which for 4 charts, it's going to be 4 plus 1, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. The integer of that is going to be 2. So the default is going to be 2 charts per row. And that's nice because it'll make a 2x2 grid. But it lets you change it if you want. If you cancel this, it returns a value of 0, so it won't do anything. But if it's more than 0, we're going to select the rest of the charts after the first one, so the second one to the end, and iRow and iCol, it's just going to figure out which position in that array of charts it is. And again, it uses integer and mod kind of algorithms. And then it takes that particular chart, and it sets the width and height, and then the left and top position based on what it calculated up here, and away we go. And it does it in the order you select them. So I'm gonna, you notice they're located in not in order. So I'm gonna select 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and now I'll resize and align them. And how many charts in a row? 2 looks good, and we'll click, and here's my grid of 4 charts, 1, 2, 3, 4, in the order that I selected them. What if I selected them in a different order? If I go 2, 4, 3, 1, and resize and align them, well, now my chart 2 is the first one I selected. That's going to be the top left chart in the grid that I make. And so I'll go resize the charts, 1 chart in a row. It just makes a column of charts, 2, 4, 3, 1 in the order I selected them, which is a little bit strange. All right, I have one more example here, and this one is a very handy example. We're going to modify the data in the chart. And I have here, it's my same grid. I have a column chart where I have plotted the first column of data by column. I also have a line chart, and I've plotted the first row by rows. And what I want to do is add the next column or add the next row to that chart. This comes in handy if you add data to your thing. I mean, you can certainly change what's in your chart by dragging the chart highlights, but this will work even if, say, all your charts are on one sheet and your data is elsewhere in the workbook. This will go find the data and work on it, and figure out. So what it does is it figures out where your data is, and it finds the next column. Actually, it sees where your data is, figures out, is it plotted by row or by column, and then it finds the next row or column and adds it to the chart. So it's pretty nice the way it works. Let's just look at the code. So if I haven't selected a chart, select a chart and try again. And then I declare a variable SRS for series. And what it is series collection count. That means it's the last series in the chart. And now I have another variable, sFormula, which is the series formula. And what the series formula looks like is, I'll select the series, and you can see in the formula bar, the first element, B3, that's the name of the series. C2 to E2, that's the X values. C3 to E3, that's the Y values. And 1 is the order of that series in the chart. There's only one series, so that's it. And so that gives me the series formula. And now what I'm going to do is use my left and my mid functions to extract just the arguments, whatever's within the parentheses. So I have my name, X values, Y values, and the series order. And now I'll split that into its individual components by splitting by columns. So now I'll have an array with the series name, X values, Y values, plot order. Declare a couple of range variables, Y values and name. And my Y values are the range of that third parameter. But when you use split, your array is 0 based. So your third parameter is parameter 2, so V formula 2, and I find the range that's defined by this parameter. And if it's not a range, you would get an error, but I put on error resume next, on error go to 0, and I tell the user your Y values are from an array, hard-coded array, not a range. And I got a typo in my code. Gee, that's embarrassing. So Y value is not in a range. And now my Y values are in a range. So I take my Y values, and if there's more rows than columns, I know it's a column of data and I want to use the next column. So I'll say, now make my Y values one column to the right of what my Y values were. And then for my series name, I'll go up to V formula, this array, and I'll take the first element, which is the series name, and I'll offset that by 1. Now, if the series name is not a range, that'll give me an error, but I have on error resume next, on error go to 0. And if that gives me an error, then our name is nothing. So now so that was rows more than columns. The same thing, if rows is less than columns, it knows it's by row, and so it offsets 1 row down, and that's what the new RY values are. And the same with our name. And now if the rows and the columns are equal, that means it's only one cell. We can't figure out if it's by row or column, so we'll just tell the user we can't do that here, and go to exit sub. But now, assume everything is fine. Let's look at that new range of Y values. And I'm going to declare our cell as a range, and I'm going to go to each cell in my Y values. And I have a Boolean blank range, which initially I set to true. If a cell is not empty, then I say blank range is false. So it's not a blank range, and I exit my loop. If I go all the way through here without finding a cell that is not empty, then blank range is still true. If blank range is true, tell the user your new range is blank. We're not going to plot it. So that means if you get to the end of the range of data, it's not going to plot the blank column afterwards. Then it exits. And then now what we do is we add a series, and we use that by saying with active chart series collection, the collection of all series, add a new series using our new Y values as the values. X values, we're going back and we're taking the first element from, or the number 1 element from the series formula, which is the X values, and we're using the range of that for my X values. And then if the name is a range, that means not our name is nothing, then we're going to use that cell as our series name, but the series name is a little bit different than the X and Y values. The X and Y values, we can just set it equal to a range. The series name, we have to use an address. So we say equals, and we say our name address, and and so forth. And then we make sure there's a legend because we're adding a series. So there's going to be at least 2 series. So we need a legend. So this makes sure that we have a legend. We might already have one, but if not, we'll add it. So let's see how that works. Here's our data. It's the first column, series 1, and I'm going to add the next series. And it adds series 2, just like that. And I can do it again. Let's add the next series after that. So it finds the last series, which is now 2, and it adds it again. And there's my 3 series. If I try to do it again, that's a blank range. It tells me it's a blank range, and it doesn't do it. What if it's done by row? Add a next series. It finds the next row and adds it to it. Adds February. Then it adds March. And it continues on as I click the button until I run out of data. So, okay, so that's all my examples I had. I actually covered it in about the time that I thought I would, which is pretty good. Sometimes I tend to go on a little bit too long. How are we doing on your end there, Ken? Any questions?
I mean, I'm fine. Yeah, no, I see that we've got one, Aurora is typing something, so that could be a question here. But I just an interesting observation, John. I always enjoy watching somebody else code because, of course, I mean, I do a lot of coding myself.
Yeah.
One of the things that was interesting to me is that you actually defined a constant within a subroutine. I don't know that I've ever done that. I always just dimension a variable and just don't change the value after I set it. Is there a reason why you defined a constant versus just dimming something?
Um, Not really.
Okay.
Uh,
Just
it,
just
it's
curious.
it's just why do you do anything? It's out of habit, and
Fair
um,
enough. I just was curious if there was an actual technical reason behind why one would be better than the other, or if it's just the way it works, and that's
I
totally
I
cool.
I
So
can't imagine one uses more memory than another, and in any case, the amount
yeah,
of memory they use is peanuts.
exactly.
Everybody
Yeah.
says don't use variants because they use more memory. Who cares?
Well, sometimes you have to, right? But
Well, yeah, sometimes, and I mean it's good not to use a variant, but use the actual type that you're using, because then it will weed out problems by throwing errors when you're testing it. But
yeah. All right. Aurora has a question. In the last example, what if you only want the last 3 months in your chart?
um, in this example here, oh,
Yeah. So if
so
you if
so my
if you only want if let's see when it's July is added, should only maintain July.
so
So right.
well, I
Yeah.
mean, uh, if I were coding it, I would have to um, think about exactly what I want. I mean, the real answer is if you can see the data range, you just take your highlight and you change it like that. So now I only have the last three. Um, it kind of depends. I mean, sometimes you'll want your chart only to show the last three, and so when you add another row of data, you want it to drop the first row from the chart, and then you add another one and drop the next row from the chart. Um, I would have to think about how I would do that, and for something like that, I might end up not even using VBA, but I would define a name that would automatically find the last three rows of my data range. So if this row is blank, my last three rows would be these. Um, so I mean, I find this particular routine actually what I do is I don't only look for the last series, but a lot of times the charts that I make might have 15 or 20 series in them, and half of them are hidden. But I use them, you know, so those hidden ones, you don't see the data points, but I'll put data labels on them. So that's how I get data labels in places that it's hard to get them otherwise. Or I might, use them some other way to annotate the chart. Um, and then what I want to do is, oh, I want to add another column, but I have all these other series in the way. And so I set it up so that I can just select one one series and it will find the next range and it will insert that series in the next position in the chart. So you see I have series 1, 2, and 3. And so if I select series 1, it'll insert a new series 2 and push series 2 to series 3 and so forth. And it will that new inserted series will have the same chart type as the series that I had selected, um, because it's probably different than all of the hidden ones that might be X, Y, because I want data points in discrete places. But it'll make the inserted one a column. And if I have primary and secondary axes, it'll put it on the same axis as it's a more specialized kind of thing. Um, I don't know. I guess the answer is it depends on how the data got there and what's the easiest way to deal with it.
For
Except
for reference, John, Aurora says, yeah, making just starting from the bottom up and counting up 3 months probably will work. I mean, at that point in time, I guess as long as the data is already sorted in the right order, it would probably
yeah.
be a way to approach it for sure. I mean, if it were time-based stuff, I'd just throw a timeline on it and filter it
Well,
personally.
yeah, exactly. You could do that. You
But
could, you know,
different ways,
there's
right?
yeah.
So
How many ways does Excel have to skin a cat, you know?
Exactly. At
How,
least three.
how many different blades are there in the Swiss Army knife that is Excel? Uh, you know, it's not a cross on the Swiss Army knife. It's really an inclined X, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, question for you, John. On your one where you actually made like basically a small multiples sort of page by creating the four different series from one particular chart. Is that
Yeah.
part of the feature of your actual Peltier Tech tool set that you have, your charting tools?
One chart per column, for example. No, that's not. Although it probably could be. Um, the problem I would have with introducing that, uh, I would have to design a whole dialogue. So I'd have to let the user tell me how big their charts are going to be, and you know, things like that. And I mean, not that that's a big deal. And maybe the reason it's not in there is I never thought of it until just now. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write it down. I told you that I'm working on an upgrade to the software, and
Yeah.
it's things like this suggestion that cause the upgrade to get pushed further out into the future.
Sorry about that, bud. But so here's what I'm thinking is that I'm thinking that, you know, when you look at something like Power BI, I mean, if you want to create a small multiples chart, it's super easy, right? You just drag a field with small multiples and it makes it. In Excel,
Yeah,
building small multiple charts is such a painful thing to do because you got to create each one individually. I'd love to
yeah,
see that kind of a feature in there where you just say, hey, here's my data table, create the chart, and boom, away it goes. Be
yeah.
brilliant.
Well, and in fact, I can see a combination of this and add next series where, okay, make the first chart, and the first chart uses only this range, and it's like, okay, now plot the whole rest of that range.
Yeah.
And you know, that would that would actually be relatively easy. So instead of over here adding where is it, way down at the bottom, instead of adding a new series, I'm adding a new chart. And in fact, what I would probably do is just copy that chart to here and have the code move the chart data like that.
There you
And
go. Look at that.
I
It's
mean,
feature
that would
development
be
live.
see, this is Excel development on the fly, you know. That's how I think I would do it. One chart per row column, or
Well, we'll let you noodle on that one, man. Then we'll see it
yeah,
in Peltier Check Charting 5, right? So there you go. All right. Is there any other questions that anybody else had that they wanted to throw out for John while we've still got him here? If so, now is a great time. And if you're just thinking about typing it, just throw in the chat, "Yep," and that'll be good enough. We'll know to wait.
yeah. So
Otherwise, we'll
how
probably
do
close
I
off for the day.
show
So
here's the chat. Yeah, I didn't open the chat when I first started. So um, boy, there's a lot of comments in there.
well, Carlos Barboza showed up, so we had a conversation. So
Yeah, yeah, I
that's why there's
know.
a
Well,
lot.
it's funny because he must have got my newsletter the other day, and he sent me a question because one of the features in my software is it does low S smoothing of data, which is a moving um, linear regression, a moving weighted linear regression of your data in order to get a nice smooth curve through a big scatter of points. And he emailed me, says your software does that. And I swear 2 or 3 years ago, I helped him do lowest smoothing using my software, but either I misremember or he does. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? We do lots of work, right? So I don't
Oh
remember what I
yeah.
had for breakfast. So, all right. Pranam's asking, is there a way to automate creation of jitter plots in Excel using VBA?
Yeah, there certainly is. I mean, I've automated doing box and whisker plots. I know Excel has their own version built in now. I built mine before they did, and mine is still better than theirs. But anyway, a variety of that would be, instead of drawing the boxes, you would just plot all your points, and instead of plotting them in a single vertical line, you would you would take your X values and you would add the jitter to them, so you get them arranged within a band instead of all in a single thing. And of course, by doing that, you need to write the VBA code that takes your data and then instead of plotting it at category 1, you have this one, plus or minus the random horizontal, the lateral jittering. But yeah, that's something you could do. And in fact, that's something that I'm considering for my upgrade is a few different options of plotting the points, overlaying the box plot with all the actual data points to give yourself more of a visual feel for the distribution. I mean, a box plot is really kind of a dull blade for showing things. So one thing you might do is plot all the points and makes kind of a sigmoid curve, and you can look at the shape of that sigmoid curve and know that it's more or less like a normal distribution, or you can just jitter them. And I was considering options like that.
I'm gonna summarize this one quickly, John. Is Pranam, if you ask John if it's possible to do something in charting, even if
the answer is yes,
no, he'll still be able to do it. And I fondly remember sending John a question years ago and saying, "Hey, John, I'm having a problem with building this chart the way I want." And John goes, "Oh, that's easy," and sent me back a 3-page list of instructions. And I was like, "This isn't easy, okay?" And I'm following these instructions, and it's looking weirder and weirder and weirder until finally I got down to like the second to last one. I click on it, and the whole chart came together like magic. And I'm like, I don't know how the heck you ever figured that out. It was not easy, but it was to John.
So. It's the Excel charting experience. It can be kind of confusing, and it is organized in its own special way. And sometimes in order to get from your starting chart to the ending chart, you have to like build things in that aren't in the right configuration until every last, it's not a wall until every brick is in place, right? And once that last brick is in place, everything just, takes on the right form.
I say it was an entertaining thing to actually look at. And I was like, wow, where did this come from? It was something else, but I will never forget that. So,
but I mean, that's the way it works. And
yeah, well, indeed, yeah. So,
and if I can send Ken a 3-page protocol, you can certainly put that, put VBA behind it and just click a button, so you don't have to do all 3 pages of steps manually.
It becomes a recipe, right? And I mean,
it's a recipe.
I was chatting with some team I was training today, and I mean, that was one of the things I was talking about with dimensional modeling. I'm like, look, I got a recipe for that, and guess what? I wrote a tool to automate the recipe because the recipe is a repeatable pattern that happens over and over again. As long as we know what it is, then absolutely we can automate it. It's just a matter of how do we build the user interface and then the code behind it to make it actually look right. So, so the concept from Pranam, I want to recreate contextual jitters from scope graphics. One of using VBA. There you go.
Speaking of Carlos, yeah. I got to scroll all the way down to 34 to see which one it is. I got it open on my other monitor here. Contextual jitters. The only link it has is to the file, so I can't tell what it is offhand. But I mean, if you want to email me and ask me about it, feel free, and I'll look into it in more detail. It's that time of year that no practical work gets done anyway, so I
distract them with something shiny.
Yeah, I need something shiny like a jitter plot. But yeah, you can. So one thing that I didn't mention that I usually do when I talk about programming is I have a couple of favorite tools that I use in programming, and one of them is the macro recorder. And you saw me use it a couple of times, and it comes in handy when I'm doing some formatting stuff. And it's the object model behind formatting is really kind of obscure, and there's a lot of different layers. So I'll just record a quick macro while I do some formatting and say, oh yeah, it's series dot format dot line dot thickness dot whatever, or whatever it is. And so I use that all the time. My other favorite programming tool is Google, because it can help me find out how to do stuff, including stuff that I used to know how to do and wrote about on my blog and I have since forgotten. I'll type something in, and a scary amount of the time it points me to my own blog for stuff.
Which leaves you wondering, how the heck did I think of that the first time? And
yeah, well, and then once I look at it and think about it, it's like, oh yeah, now it's coming back to me. Now it makes sense. I have to admit that I haven't used Copilot for this. I've had some problems with my Microsoft accounts, and I just have been more busy fixing that than trying out new stuff. So I haven't done much with Copilot. ChatGPT stinks at some of this stuff, though I hear it's better than the first version. I've only used 3.5. I haven't advanced.
And ChatGPT 4.0 is actually pretty good. I use it a lot. And the big thing that I find with ChatGPT, though, is you have to be able to read the output. So for someone like yourself who has a really good background in it, throw in the general gist of this is what I'm trying to do. But when you get the response out, you're going to need to look at it and go, is this actually doing what I want? Is it gives me, it gives you something that gets you close. And that's the thing. It'll get you 80% of the way there, but the last 20% you may have to do something different. As far as Copilot, my experience with Copilot has been that there are several Copilots in the Microsoft stack. The only one that I have found that actually works well is the one inside Visual Studio. And that's the GitHub Copilot. That is fantastic for code. Unfortunately, it's not in the VBA editor. So I found the other ones just right now woefully lacking. That's just my experience. So yeah. So awesome. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up for this time. John, thanks so much for coming and doing this. I really appreciate it. Some great stuff.
It's my pleasure, Ken.
That you showed there. And I'll get the recording up in the next week or so. We'll post on Meetup once it's all live. Thanks everyone for coming. We will be announcing our next meetups sometime later on once we've got our speakers lined up for January and February. But I appreciate everybody coming here. Have yourself a safe and wonderful, happy and holiday season. And hopefully we'll see you back in 2025. Till next time, folks. See you then.